I grew up in the church. I've always been in church, even before my dad became a pastor and made that big change to go to seminary and then, become a pastor. I accepted Christ before then. We used to go to church, Lexington Baptist Church, and when I was 7 years old, we went to the VBS there. And it's funny because I'd so recently forgotten this. Recently, a couple semesters ago in college, we'd had a lot of speakers come and talk about in our chapel, talk about you need to know the exact moment when you're saved, otherwise there's a high probability you aren't saved. And that really tore me up inside because it'd been so long. It'd been like 12 years since I'd been saved when I was hearing all these messages, and I really began to struggle with the idea of my salvation. But then God blessed me, and He helped me to remember that time when I was 7 at VBS. It was July 26, 2003. And basically, I remember sitting at the end of the pew at this VBS. I remember being called to pray the sinner's prayer. I remember being moved by the sermon. I don't remember what the sermon was about, but I just remember being moved to pray the sinner's prayer, to accept Jesus into my life. I remember vividly how it felt to admit to God I was a sinner, and how entering this faith, this covenant with God, how it felt then as genuine as it does feel now. And I think a lot of us can struggle, those of us who were saved when we were young can struggle and begin to question our salvation because we were young and we didn't understand everything. But just because we didn't understand everything doesn't mean that belief wasn't there. And I genuinely think that belief was there for me. I admitted to God I was a sinner. I admitted that I believed God. I believed in His Son Jesus, and I believed Jesus came down and died for my sins, and there's no way I can go to heaven and be with God and be right in God's eyes except by putting my faith in Jesus. Jesus is the only way. I remember praying that. And so while I didn't understand everything about God then, and I definitely see the change that happened in my life. There have been a lot of ways I've grown as a kid, as I'm sure a lot of you have experienced. As a kid, you're afraid of things. Well, I was afraid of a lot of things, and I had a big imagination. I was afraid of caterpillars and plants and just everything. But like many of you, I was afraid of the dark, and so going to bed at night was a bit difficult. I remember just being terrified once the lights went out. Just nothing was there to protect me from whatever my mind could think was in the dark. I learned a lot of memory verses as a kid, but only one really stuck with me, and that's Joshua 1:9. And in that verse, God is talking to Joshua as he's entering this new period in his life, and Joshua's afraid. And God tells him, "Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be terrified. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go." And just that concept resonated with me. Even as a kid, God would be with me always. And that just shaped everything. And He commanded me to be courageous. And suddenly, it was as though there was just a force field around me as a kid. I remember visibly imagining the force field that was God around me now that God had entered my life and promised to always be with me. And I was able to sleep because nothing that was in the dark could touch me anymore. And I've grown in a lot of other ways, but I think that's just one good example of after I made that decision my life was different. You know, I used to be a really angry, temperamental kid, bottled things up. Now, I've been able to find people who I can talk to and vent, but vent in a good way. So then I'm not bottling everything up and getting angry. And I've gained self-control through that. God's blessed me by growing me in that way. And I think one of the main things that really helped me when I was doubting in college my salvation recently, I called my dad, and he reminded me not only of VBS, but my dad's a good encourager, and he told me, Adam, I see the fruits in your life. Your life bears fruits, and you know, once you're saved, you will see those fruits begin. Your life will begin to bear those fruits: kindness, self-control, gentleness, all of those. And you know, I'm obviously not perfect. Nobody will be, except Jesus. But I've been justified before God by Jesus' death, and my God is good, and He's still growing me, and that's pretty much my testimony, guys. Regardless of the fact that I made the decision at a young age, it was just as real. The feelings and my love for God were just as real then as they are now. I have a deeper understanding of God now, and I understand the world more. But that decision has led me to where I am now. I wouldn't be where I am now. I shudder to think where I would be right now with some of the things this world's put me through. But God brought me through those things because I confessed faith in His Son, and I find my strength in God every day. Because my God is good, and He loves me, and He's promised He will always be with me.